First of all, welcome everyone to our first session in our EDI Roundtable series. My name is Emma Wallace, and I'm the Program Specialist at ECVO. Before we get started today, I just want to acknowledge that we're hosting this event on Treaty 6 territory. It's a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We also acknowledge all of the many First Nations and Métis and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for millennia. So I think it's really important that we all take a moment to reflect on the privileges that we've been afforded on this territory. I know many of us, as individuals and organizations, myself and ECVO included, are on a learning journey towards reconciliation. And recognizing the land that we're able to host this session on, whether it's virtual or in person, I think is a really critical part of that. So this land has a really long history of being a place of learning and exchange. And as an organization, ECVO is super grateful to have the public platform through which we can continue promoting learning, collaboration, and the exchange of information for the betterment of our communities here on Treaty 6. So with that acknowledgement and reflection, I'd like to share a little bit about what we're doing here today. So at ECVO, we've been working pretty hard internally to kind of figure out and encourage learning around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So what does this mean to us as individuals, our roles in promoting kind of equitable, diverse, and inclusive spaces? And also, how does this translate to our work in the nonprofit sector? I think we realized pretty quickly the value of coming together as a group to discuss these topics. And at the same time we were doing this internally, we heard from many of you, our members, and our community, that a space for learning, reflection, and action is needed around these principles of EDI. So at ECVO, we have the platform to be able to host these types of events, but we don't necessarily have the experience. And so we've partnered with Elli and the Center for Race and Culture to put on this series. And we brought together some pretty incredible folks who have tons of knowledge, tons of experience to share with us kind of around all of these topics, whether it's diversity and inclusion. We have a couple going on next month around intersectionality, accessibility, and so forth. So we're thrilled to be able to host today's session and the 5 that follow over the coming months. So just before we get started, I know we have a full crowd and we're on, I'll just acknowledge this because hilarious. We are on a regular Zoom account today, rather than a webinar Zoom. So if some of you are feeling slightly overwhelmed like myself, I just want to go over a couple little Zoom etiquette things before we get started. So first things first, I'll just ask that people keep their microphones on mute throughout the panel conversation. If you have any questions or reflections, feel free to pop those in the chat box. That'll be monitored by Elli and myself. We're also recording today's session. So if you're not wanting to be on the recording, just feel free to take yourself off video. And then lastly, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pin, right now I think I've pinned myself, and then once our panel members join us, I'll have them pinned at the top. So in theory, that's who you're seeing throughout today's session. But you can also go to the top right-hand corner. There's like a box there's 3 dots and then a larger box, and it says view beside it. And if you click on that, you can also hit speaker view. So I think that's kind of everything from my end. So I think what I'll do is I will introduce Elli, the Executive Director for the Center of Race and Culture. She's our partner in this series, and she's also the moderator for today.
Thank you so much, Emma. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have 3 guest speakers with us, and I have the privilege of introducing them. We have Yvonne Chiu. who is one of the founding members of the Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op here in Edmonton. MCHB Co-op is a workers' cooperative established to address health and social issues experienced by immigrant and refugee families. As a member and also as the executive director of the co-op, Yvonne has spent the past 2 decades making visible the struggles, strengths, and aspirations of ethnocultural minority communities for the purpose of community actions, system learning, and social change. She has worked on promoting deeper understanding and wider appreciation of cultural brokering, an evidence-based practice much needed for responding to diversity and achieving social inclusion. Then we have Basel Abou Hamrah. Basel came to Canada in 2015. He realized that there were no spaces for the LGBTQ plus newcomers, and it was hard for him to connect with the community. Since then, he has played a lead role in developing the Rainbow Refuge program and creating services to support especially vulnerable LGBTQ plus refugee claimants through their asylum process. He's also the co-coordinator of the LGBTQ plus newcomer Edmonton group. Basel's a combination of personal and professional experience provides him with unique insight that has contributed to shaping the creation of very specialized LGBTQ plus services in Edmonton and a 98% success rate supporting LGBTQ plus refugee claimants before the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. And last but not least, we have Sara Buchensky. Sara has worked in the settlement sector for over 10 years. She currently works in the Rainbow Refuge program at Edmonton Mennonite Center, EMCN, supporting LGBTQ plus newcomers and refugees. She's also the co-coordinator of the LGBTQ plus newcomer Edmonton group. When she started working in the sector, she noticed that there were no safe services available for the LGBTQ plus newcomers in Edmonton. And since then, she has worked actively to advocate and establish relevant services and programming in our community. So welcome, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today. You know, we have been talking for years about diversity and inclusion in our sector, but we realize that not everyone is in the same place when it comes to their journey towards more inclusive and equitable practices. I want to start with this more general question, and I will start with Yvonne, then we go to Basel, and then we go to Sara. More than anything for me, it's about like your understanding of these concepts. How do you define the concepts of diversity and inclusion and their connection? And feel free to give us examples from your work, your practice, and your experiences. Yvonne.
Thank you, Elli. Is my voice coming through? Sometimes either I didn't update my Zoom or I'm speaking too softly. Everybody can hear me, yeah? Yeah. Well, thank you, Elli. Well, I see so many friends in the audience, so I'm just happy to share a little bit our own lived experience. As you all know, myself and my colleagues in the Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op, we were created by 14 natural women leaders back in the early 90s, but from within the ethnocultural community. So as you can imagine, we are the people in terms of the ethnocultural minority. So coming from that perspective, plus the perspective of us wishing to be the relational bridges in the term of cultural brokering, this is how I'm going to answer Elli's very wonderful question. Everybody, we know diversity is a reality. Hey, this is why we're all together. There's no doubt that we are living a highly diverse and pluralistic city and province and country. So diversity is a reality. And for inclusion, then inclusion is when we are collectively successful to pursue very intentional, committed, ways of being, ways of relating, then we will have the outcome of inclusion, right, everyone? So I would explain it that way. And so very briefly about our own experience in the last 20 some years to promote inclusion of our population is the following. Everyone, this is a layperson's analysis, but you probably would agree with me. Many of our organizations and public institutions were created many decades ago. And so it was designed with certain population in mind. But what happens is there is a tendency for us to carry on doing what we're good at. And maybe after a little while, we notice that maybe the way we work, the service we provide might be out of sync with other population that have emerged or have arrived, have grown, right? So I think this is where the main, main focal area for us to explore. And if we look at organizational development, maybe think back to why you were created and for whom were you designing this. And when you look around, who might you be missing right now for providing good service, right? And so I will use a very, very simple theory. You know, this is a non-system theory. We all know as human beings, we really will feel connected and included when there is relationship that is built on understanding, right? So from our years of experience being the relational bridge, what we're inviting everyone to consider is when you look out there and see that you might not be serving a particular population and group, and you wish to, what would be the most natural next step? I might be answering the questions that coming, is actually think about, are you developing relationship with those population? And part of working towards inclusion is how much do you have relationship with those that you currently don't serve? How much from that relationship are you able to gain trust and understanding? And I'm talking about mutual understanding. If that is happening, you're on the right path. And that if you actually found trusted intermediaries, right? Someone who is either from the community or very familiar with both your organization and the community, you're off to a good start. Then you have a relational agent to help you grow incrementally. And that's what actually we've done as cultural brokers over the last 20 some years. And it is about fully, first of all, ourselves understanding our communities, its evolving struggles and strengths and aspiration. And rooted in that, we begin to respond to their strengths and challenges and aspiration, and then seek out those who should be interested in this relationship very intentionally. So really from there, through networks of relationship, we've been able to affect change. And so very luckily, we've been able to build very strong relationship with many of you in the Zoom, but also with formal systems that really impact our population, like child welfare, like the school system, like the healthcare system. And there we have a chance to gradually, incrementally affect change. Many of us are not part of those public institutions. There we have to collectively work on advocating for change in procedures and policies. I think that's roughly 5 minutes, hey, Elli? Okay, so I think we probably got everybody a little bit interested, so I can ease back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And I think the whole concept of taking the time to build relationships and build trust, that's key. That's very important. Thank you. Let's go to Basel.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. I would like to answer your question. I like the definition that diversity is the what and inclusion is how. As Yvonne said, like diversity, it's our reality. It's the makeup of an identity such as gender, race, ethnicity, but the inclusion is the measure of culture that enables diversity to thrive. I'll use the bigger example. We are in Canada. Canada is a very diverse country. There is lots of cultures, background, groups of people. But thinking about inclusion, are some of those groups their voices are heard? What we are doing to make those groups and communities thrive and integrate in our community. So for example, for myself, when I came to Canada, I came late 2015 as refugee from Syria. I came to a diverse country where I feel that I belong to this country, but there is another element for my identity as LGBTQ person. I want to be connected to the LGBTQ community here, but I didn't know how. I was so scared to go to LGBTQ organizations such as Pride Center. Like I was scared, what if someone from my community saw me there? And also not feeling safe to come out in settlement organization while I was studying English classes at the Edmonton Midnight Center. There was lack of services for the LGBTQ newcomers, and many other refugees, newcomers who are LGBTQ shared that with me. Personally, I was so lucky to meet Sara. So Sara helped me and introduced me to the LGBT community here. And we started the LGBTQ newcomer group. We need that safe space for the LGBTQ newcomers here in Edmonton. And I think supporting groups and communities to create their own safe spaces, I think it's a very important step for inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Basel. So what I hear from you sharing your experience is how organic this was formed based on those needs. And so the needs of a particular group of newcomers were not necessarily recognized before, but there was that space. So it was recognized, relationships were built, but people from the same community joined the program, developed the program together and started serving the community. Thank you, beautiful. Sara, would you like to jump in?
Sure, thank you so much and good morning, everybody. So for me, I think that Yvonne and Basel covered the concepts of diversity and inclusion very well. I think especially for inclusion, what Yvonne was saying and both Basel, for me, it's about trust and safety and relationships. The relationships are so important. So just having people present is not the same as having relationships with each other. And also taking active steps to get to know one another and to have a curiosity and an openness and a recognition that there's so many different kinds of experiences and we can't possibly know them all. And having that little bit of willingness to know, sometimes we aren't seeing what's going on. And so having those conversations and just approaching everybody with that interest and also to maybe look at inclusion in a way of not just like bringing people in, but also drawing the skills and experiences for new ways of doing things. So for my experience, when I first came into the settlement sector, I, at the time, was working at Citizenship and Immigration Canada, which were serving a very diverse population, of course. And at that time, I started to notice that there wasn't really very much conversation about LGBTQ newcomers. And I just noticed that because of my own identity. And there was a lot more going on in Ontario, and they were starting to talk about services and experiences. And I thought, well, I know that these people exist here, and I'm not seeing how we're serving them or how we're actively making those relationships to be able to serve them here. From there, I've started working in a settlement agency as a community connector. And there was a few of us on staff, of a very small staff, that were part of the LGBTQ community. But we were all very hesitant to really show ourselves as LGBTQ individuals. And working as a settlement connector, I would be translating, and I would start to notice that clients maybe were editing how they were sharing information. So for example, if somebody was filing taxes, they might not mention that they have a partner, or if they're talking about people they wanted to bring to Canada, they wouldn't say or talk about those special partners that, you know, they wouldn't reveal pieces of themselves. And I realized that actually they weren't being served in a full holistic way. And so I started to talk about these issues a little bit, and there was a lot of support and encouragement, but I still didn't want to be out fully. And it wasn't until I went to EMC and I decided, well, maybe it's time to actually be out. And I was advised, you know what, it's not a good idea. The supplement sector is not ready for that. And I decided to go for it anyways. And from there, it's been an amazing journey to see the shifts and changes within the settlement sector, and also the encouragement from the broader society, or like the broader mainstream community. And it's a process together where we do that work together side by side. And I think that there's a lot of, in Edmonton, there's so much willingness and so much want to do this. So I'm so excited to be having this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Sara. So back to Yvonne. Working with different organizations and teams, this is basically my experience on assessing their policies and programs through the inclusion lens. I often hear this assumption that they have a diverse team, therefore they're an inclusive agency. What is your response to that? Does diversity necessarily lead to inclusion?
Yeah, Elli, thank you for asking. Everyone, don't mind me to kind of also repeat a little bit. Remember earlier I said that when we set up an organization and we have certain structures and processes, we get very familiar with it. And that structure and processes might not actually be accommodating for diversity and equity, right? And what I'm thinking about equity means, you know, we generally have a desire to serve using a certain approach, and we're successful at it. But that might be the kind of approach that needs to be tweaked for the needs and realities, life realities of those we aren't serving well yet. So, so what is important is to complement. It's wonderful to see our colleagues in different organizations recruiting diversely, but please make sure to learn from these diverse staff, how could the structure, the procedure, and the policy of the organization actually support them in being responsive to the population that maybe the organization doesn't have as rich a history and knowledge in serving. And so I think back to a few points that our team share, it's so important that, I love the way Sara mentions safety. Truly, in order to address inequity, we must remember to create all kinds of safety, psychological safety, physical safety, so on and so forth, so that real conversation can happen from those whose voices you must hear from in order to gradually grow, to become more inclusive in your practice. So for example, hearing from your diverse team of staff, understanding how they're able to serve the community, or how they feel maybe I'm not allowed to, given the organizational policy. I think those honest conversations would be very important, asking them how could they be supported to truly serve a particular population. And then of course, ideally, you actually have the relationship to hear directly from the community members you're beginning to, or you wish to serve better, and really hear from them, from their life realities. And then from there, you will see, okay, we have diverse staff, but from the sound of it, we needed more elements of organizational change to be truly honoring this diverse population. So that would be my answer to this question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Basel.
Yeah, my answer will be no. These terms usually people use these terms interchangeably, but they are distinctly different. For example, from my experience, I been recruited to be on one organization board. They recruit me because I represent the newcomer, person of color, LGBTQ person. Now, did I feel comfortable being at that board? I don't think so, because I don't think my voice being heard on that board. I didn't feel that I'm contributing the way I want to contribute, or my ideas. They heard my ideas or anything. So I ended up resigning from that board. And this is I think what it is. Like yes, you have diverse staff in your organization, but are there voices here? So my answer for that person, if they say that for me, I'll be like, by asking them lots of questions. I'll be like, what's your policy around that? Do your staff feel comfortable, safe, their voices being heard? Look at your management, senior management. Is there representation of other ethnicities also, or background or anything? Do you have any thing in a place to empower those staff to rank higher, or to achieve their goals? So this is what my answer will be.
Awesome. Those are all great questions. Here at the Center for Race and Culture, we were working with the leadership of an organization, and we were looking at equity. They were more advanced, so we were looking at equitable practices. And I remember we got this kind of resistance from the group saying that we have policies around diversity. We have a very diverse team, but it's interesting, throughout that process, as we were working with them over the course of time, we showed them that the diverse staff were not in the leadership team. They were not, and they were the ones that were laid off during the pandemic. So basically, when it comes to that, precarious jobs and not being in the leadership of an organization and making those decisions, you can have policies in place for diverse hire, but it does not mean that inclusion, or you can have inclusion in aspects of your organization, but it does not mean that there is that holistic approach and it's embedded in all aspects of what we do. So that's why we talk about it as a journey, right? Sara, to you.
Thank you. I agree as well that diversity does not equal inclusion. I think the only thing that I'd really like to add is that there's a risk. There's a risk in revealing or showing pieces of yourself. And like you just mentioned, Elli, that the diverse staff are the first to go. So especially in established organizations that have a cultural practice or a way of doing things, even though you have policies, there's still norms that happen. And there's sort of the majority, and the way that things just usually happen is kind of what's the easiest way. So when you have people from a diverse range of experiences, they're going to have different opinions, different expectations, different ideas, different needs that will tug and pull at whatever is the easiest way. So especially in a context of less funding, or where you have to do more, take those active steps, there's going to be a tension there. And I think that it's so important to have a willingness to actively fight for those things. And people who might be in more marginal positions have more to lose. And so it's riskier for them to stand up and ask for those things. So we have to be really willing to reach out and do that with them. So a policy is not the same as the cultural or the organizational culture.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So I've heard from HR and leadership of organizations that they would like to build a diverse team, but they generally don't receive enough applications from folks from different ethnocultural backgrounds, or the ones that they get are not strong enough. What is your experience, and how do you think organizations can attract, hire, and build diverse teams and inclusive teams, hopefully? Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you, Elli. I think back to relationship again. I think oftentimes we think of talented individuals whom our organization could recruit as individuals say, I wanted to remind everybody in our ethnocultural community or the other communities, we actually is a sector. We have relationship and network. So part of the strategy is actually how well are you connected to that invisible sector, that community or network. And ideally, if you have those who are part of that community, you will then know what is the best way to promote an opening in your organization. Hey, and never overlook among your volunteers, you might have members of the very communities you're hoping to reach. And really back to the idea of having trusted intermediary that not only know your organizational needs, but actually understand the realities and ways of connecting, ways of sharing information in different communities, right? So that would be something I would suggest, is to really find appropriate intermediaries who can help you see how do these communities receive information, hey, rather than just rely on perhaps more conventional channels.
Thank you, Yvonne. Basel,
For me,
what would be your response?
yeah, for me, I think it's looking into the wording of the job postings that you have. Is it appealing to those communities? Is it talking to those people, inviting them to your organization? I think it's very important step to just look at the job posting, look to the wording. Also, you can reach those communities that you are targeting. Go to their social media platforms, their website, their community centers. Post those job postings there, call them, let them know that you are welcoming them into your organization. Also, there is lots of other strategies, such as like there is something called blind interviews, where then you don't, so people, they submit their resume without their name, phone number, anything about describing about them, and then that's how you and you don't look at them in the interview, so you are people avoiding their biases, and then they do the interview and they hire on the talent and the skills regardless. Yeah, those are my emphasis. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Sara?
I think the one thing that I would like to add is also just remembering and recognizing that that privilege is real, and that people from different backgrounds and from marginalized experiences might not have the same opportunities that somebody that grew up in Canada speaking English has access to Canadian workplace experience, education. So looking beyond the certifications or the jobs that they might have, and realizing people's potential and their personal experience, their interpersonal skills, and maybe even sometimes hiring someone that might not on paper have the exact qualifications that you're looking for, but hiring them with that idea of giving that opportunity and support to be able to mentor them and start to build them up.
Thank you, Sara. I would also, based on my own experience, I would also like to challenge all of us. Sometimes we think that we are objective and we are reviewing these applications, but what happens is that my lens, my expectations, biases, and expectations come in. I think that I'm being very objective, and the way I assess two applications, based on the same job description, I might be harsh on one and I might take it easier on another one. I've seen that in practice, that people not even knowing, it's not necessarily conscious. Sometimes people are very picky. They're like, oh, they don't have enough of this experience. I'm like, okay, but look at your top 5. They don't have enough experience in that particular area. And why did you pick this one? And you're so harsh on this one. The other thing that I have seen for many positions is when people apply, They get invited to the interview. We are blown away. We are impressed by their skills and by the interview and everything. And then you're like, yeah, but they don't have the Canadian work experience, right? So maybe a big part of it for the HR, for the leadership, is kind of challenging our own expectations, challenging the lens that we bring into reviewing applications, right? Of asking this question, does it really require Canadian work experience, or can we redefine Canadian work experience? I've seen newcomers with years and years of volunteer experience, and we can see all of that. We can review all of that. Second is that in many positions, you can easily, the skills are transferable. They can be translated into the Canadian context, and we need to give people a few months to adjust, right? So why aren't we open to inviting people to the table who do not necessarily have Canadian work experience, right? So I think it's important for us to kind of to challenge ourselves and our assumptions in that process as well. So let's go to our next question. So in our work, we encourage a holistic approach, as I mentioned before, when it comes to organizational diversity and inclusion, meaning that they should be incorporated in all areas and levels, from hiring and retention to communication, policies, programming, service delivery, from leadership to frontline staff. But this can be overwhelming, especially for organizations in this sector where resources are limited. Can you share your experience and observations? Are there any specific resources for our sector, or do you know of any successful models or tools that different organizations who are willing to take this journey, they want to be more inclusive? Are there resources that they can access and they can use? Yvonne?
Thank you, Elli. As everyone, as you know, I'm very, very old. I'm kind of ancient, so I could mention a few things. Actually, just not long ago, I mean, since the late 80s and 90s, we've been looking at organizational framework, right, towards inclusion. So there's no lack of good framework. But even as recent as a few years ago, colleagues who are funded by the city, remember the Towards Inclusion organization, there is a very simple framework and tool that we can all look at and revisit again, because quite honestly, Elli, you're right, it seems so daunting. Many organizations have genuine interest, but just don't know where to start. I would say always start at what you're good at. That, if you had a chance to look at this framework, you will see, okay, we're not too bad in the volunteer area. We have diverse volunteers, right? Then maybe hear from the volunteers, or you already have a number of staff that are very diverse in their background. Actually learn from them, hear from them. I think earlier, Sara and Basel and I were kind of promoting participatory democracy because for an organization to address equity, you must be equitable in the organization. They really hear from the most marginalized, particularly whose perspectives are so important. Maybe start with truly listening and hearing and really creating safety, because sometimes without intention, our organization does their power structure. Even when you are the most democratic leader or a supervisor or manager, many of us still view you as having more power, and therefore we mustn't speak the truth. So you must create the safest environment for very honest conversation, because that is the beginning place. Whoever you have relationship with in your organization that has knowledge and connection to those you're not yet serving fully, hear from them. And maybe, like I mentioned earlier, design very genuine tea conversation. It could be over Zoom, and hear from community members that you wish so much to serve. Learn from them, humbly learn from them. Then you're off to a good start. But you might already, if you look at the framework, you might already see you have some strengths in different aspects of community, organizational development. Start where you have strength, and then learn from others. Create community of practice, get together with other colleagues who are in similar position in other not-for-profit and learn from each other. There's always progress, and you're already probably on the path. You're just not sure where you are at. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Basel.
I agree with what Yvonne was sharing. I think it's important to start by the people with lived experiences, to learn from them, and also like it's from them and to them, and another, I think, important resource is the intersectional organizational assessment by ASA. It's based upon diversity, inclusion, and psychological safety competency assessment framework. It's audit it's organizational audit, starting with policy, management, staff, physical space. Of that, I think it's important resource. Start from there.
Thank you. Sara?
I think that it's always important to remember that organizational change is a slow process. So I think that having sort of short, medium, and long-term goals to have a realistic hope for change, just be gentle with yourself too, you know, and know that there's going to be growing pains, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be new ideas, there's going to be lack of funding. But really the best resource are the people. So I think a great example is the Rainbow Refuge program at EMCN. That started because of the LGBTQ newcomer group. And we started that as a grassroots community group. And from the relationships we started to build and from what we were learning there, the management at EMCN recognized that and saw how many people were coming. And from there said, okay, you know, we don't have any funding, but why don't you take time back in place of the time that you spend doing this group? Which was, you know, it's just small support, but it was supporting the people that were actually working in community and doing this work. And from those relationships that started to develop, we had more evidence of what was going on, which then allowed us to apply for funding, which then has grown into a program. So this has been a 5-year process, and we're still in this, we're still growing and it's still very small, but you can see that there is the short term where they're tentative, trying things out, working with community group, going to finding some funding, going to growing, going to working with organizations and talking across community. So really, yeah, again, people are the best resource in front of you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the chat box and I see a comment from Angelica. I wonder if there's an important piece about inclusion of Indigenous peoples within the settlement sector and perhaps people living with disabilities. How would the settlement sector sit with the presence of Indigenous people in that leadership? Any comment on that? Any response to that would be great. I thought it's a great question. Let's talk about it. Yvonne, Basel, Sara,
Yeah.
If any of you have anything.
We definitely have a long ways to go, hey? Thanks to the colleague who brought it up. And probably, I hope we can open it up for conversation because we actually have in the Zoom colleagues who have expertise in that. And of course, within our own ethnocultural communities, we have families with beloved who have disabilities and individual disability. We all have a long ways to go. These are the additional elements of marginalization that we all need to learn more from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I know that my organization, Center for Race and Culture, and MCHP, we are all tenants in a place called Edmonton Intercultural Center. There are 9 nonprofit organizations, and before the pandemic, I remember seeing partnerships, programs that were collaborative programs between newcomer serving agencies and Indigenous organizations, programs to bring these relatives close together, so kind of help them to have a better understanding of each other, of different cultures, but also highlighting the responsibilities of newcomers, of immigrants when it comes to truth and reconciliation. We are all treaty people. The fact that my ancestors were not part of this colonial process doesn't mean that I don't have a responsibility. I live on this land and I am responsible. So talking about those responsibilities is important. I've seen programs like that before. Right now, EMCN I know is working on something similar. So thank you for the question. Sara, Basel, is there anything else you would like to add to that?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight the partnership between the Edmonton Midnight Center and Bent Arrow, an indigenous serving agency, and it's part of C5's organization that work in different aspects in the community. So I think those partnerships, this is the start point to have this happening, and we still at the beginning, I think. And yeah, hopefully we are going in the right direction.
Thank you, Sara.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, I absolutely agree that it's so important to build those relationships, and recognizing that within the settlement sector, it's literally called settlement, and realizing what that actually means. And so that relationship between the people and the place that we're in is really important to bring to the table early on in conversations with newcomers. So people absorb the stereotypes and prejudices so early on, and I feel that newcomers and Indigenous people are pitted against each other when actually there's so much potential for relationship and similar lived experience. So with the relationships that we've been building with Bent Arrow, I think something that I really appreciate about it is that they're not just one-time events, or it's not a specific service or program, but that we're trying to build ongoing relationships between newcomers that are arriving in a long-term kind of way, so that there's that spending time together and being around one another to really develop those relationships that are really, really positive and exciting, and that people get to ask each other questions. You know, I remember at one of the events that we had, there was one of the people from Bent Arrow walked right up to someone and she just asked about the hijab. You know, she just asked her straight out. And I think most people would be really uncomfortable with that, but because of the relationships in an ongoing way, it was really easy to have that conversation, and people were smiling throughout. And then also for disability, I wonder if this new normal of hybrid workplace will be a little bit helpful, I hope, because when we look at the job postings, right now, limited funding means you have to be able to do everything. You have to be able to move around, you have to get across the city, you have to drive, you have to this, you have to that. And quite frankly, those kinds of job descriptions are not inviting for people with any sort of disability. So hopefully that will change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Yvonne, I really liked what you pointed out about, you know, inviting organizations to start where they're good at, where they're strong, right? Focus on their strengths and start from there. If this whole journey is overwhelming, and I think that's beautiful, beautiful advice. We are coming to the end of our conversation. So ECVO, when they came to us and we started this partnership together, we are hoping that, you know, this is an opportunity for us in this sector to come together, to invite experts, community leaders, natural leaders, to discuss these topics, to share resources, to share experiences. But ECVO also hopes to provide that support in this space for the nonprofit sector. So what can be the role of ECVO in supporting the nonprofit and charitable organizations in their EDI journey? Yvonne?
Actually, Elli, I would love to hear from our colleagues in the audience. I'm just really keen to hear what they're thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. So we invite everyone to share your thoughts. If you have any suggestions, ideas for ECVO, And I will go to Sara and Basel, and then we will kind of monitor the chat box as well, and then we'll go back to Yvonne if she would like to add anything. So Sara, any thoughts around that?
I think that, so having conversations like this is a great start. Something that I wanted to share, so considering that this is ECVO, with our LGBTQ newcomer group, we often go to volunteer as a group because people might be shy to go as by themselves in an LGBTQ sort of way. So we go as a group to provide support for one another and to share that experience, and also to have that bridging between organizations and the community members. It can be really daunting and intimidating to show up at a place to volunteer and there's nobody like you, people don't understand your experience, maybe you don't know how to find it, you might not know exactly what's expected, or what the, like at an auction, say, what exactly is an auction, how am I helping? So having someone actually explain the pieces and say, oh, in Canada, this is what we're doing, or this is the purpose of this is how you can participate, and to really bring people into the fold. So I think that ECVO could play a role in creating opportunities like that, and to do that caretaking around the relationships to make those experiences, both for the organizations and for the community members, easier, like facilitate that understanding between one another.
Beautiful, thank you. Basel, do you have any suggestions for ECVO in this space?
Well, Sara took my idea, but I just want to say, like, it will be slow and ongoing process. The first thing is to have goals towards diversity and inclusion, and regularly to measure the progress. It's a key. I love Sara what she said, like exposing organization to volunteer from diverse background. It's the first step for both the organization and the volunteers.
I think I would like also to acknowledge ECVO's openness to this idea, their humility, saying that, you know what, this is the space that we have resources, but not necessarily the experience at this moment. Let's collaborate, let's work together. And as a small nonprofit organization here, I would love to see this to evolve and turn into a community of practice, a space for us to come together, to exchange ideas, to share resources, and hopefully develop resources together that are accessible, they're available to different organizations in the sector. We know that our resources are limited. So coming together, working together, sharing resources and developing Edmonton-based, Alberta-based resources can be very very helpful. So are we taking, Emma, are we taking any questions from the floor if people want to unmute themselves? And
Elli, I just want to share something.
Please, go ahead.
Working toward diversity and inclusion, sometimes it can be uncomfortable and can create some backlash within organization. So just to be ready and prepared, that will happen, that naturally will happen, but the important is the main goal that we have.
Beautiful, thank you, thank you. Emma, oh, sorry, Yvonne, go ahead, please.
I know Sentsetsa wanted to join. Maybe just an observation. Hey, in the chat, there are a lot of colleagues interested in maybe having a conversation in terms of looking at those with disability and Indigenous, right? That's really where we might want to go for EVCO as well, right? So yeah, but I see Sentsetsa's hands up. Yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you everybody for having this opportunity for us to have a conversation. I really appreciate the idea of creating a community of practice so that we can all come and share our ideas and our experiences. So I was just going to mention that when Elli said that we should consider having a community of practice so that we can learn together and learn and co-create a new future for all of us together as we learn from one another. That was my comment. That's why I raised my hand, that I really appreciate that idea that we can work together across the city and across the province as best as we can, so we learn with one another and co-create together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the engagement I see here is beautiful. It's amazing. This is exactly what we wanted. So we will have a session on intersectionality. We will have another session on accessibility. But hopefully you bring these ideas, these questions, your experiences to the table, and then we can continue. It's not just these 6 sessions. We can continue the conversation. It's with these roundtables, and hopefully this can be like very naturally can evolve into a community of practice. Yeah, thank you for that. So I think I covered all the questions here, and back to you, Emma.
All righty. Thank you so much, Elli, for the wonderful moderating. And then Yvonne, Basel, and Sara, I'm just so honored to have all of you speak. I was telling Yvonne beforehand, I got emails from at least 4 people once they've registered that they were so excited to hear her speak. And I know it's the same. I've gotten messages from quite a few people throughout this session saying that Sara, Basel, Yvonne, that they just love the session and love all of you. So we're so honored to have you with us. As kind of everyone has said throughout the chat, Elli mentioned it, and then our 3 panelists as well. You know, this is an opportunity, I think. It started out of ECVO. We're still in a learning journey. This is a place that, you know, we're still not, we don't have our footing completely. So it's as much a learning opportunity for us as it is for everyone else. And so I think that definitely there's opportunity for this to evolve into so much more as we all kind of learn together. So there's about a minute left, so I just want to highlight that there will be a follow-up email that comes later this week that will include a recording of this session. We're also going to be creating a bit of, I mentioned it in the chat, almost like a summary document to kind of to highlight what it is that we talked about today, some of the awesome points that our panelists mentioned, and then we will link the resources that were discussed today as well. And so that'll be a next almost step or action piece for people to kind of take away and keep learning from this session. You know, we don't want this to be a one-off. We want people to keep learning from the session and keep using this. So Elli also mentioned that we have, this is the first of 6 sessions coming up. So our next one is next month. I'll add the registration link to our follow-up email as well, and it's on intersectionality. So we're at 11 o'clock, so I will just say one more time, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you again to Elli and our panelists. We're so honored. So happy Tuesday, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.